You're excited. You've made an offer on the property. It's been accepted. Yippee! You now have a 5-day cooling off period in Queensland. What's that mean? What's the repercussions? And how is that grossly misunderstood in the last transaction I did by both the buyers and the seller's solicitor? It's quite alarming how the buyer and the seller's solicitor almost cost my client, the seller, over $40,000. So let's break it down a little bit. So basically your cooling off period is exactly that. It's a 5 business day cooling off period that you're allowed to have on a contract of purchase for a house in Queensland, which allows you to change your mind. If you change your mind in that period, you have to pay 0.25% of the purchase price as a penalty to the seller. Now, I don't quite understand that, because if the government mandates a cooling off period, but as a buyer you pay a penalty, I don't get that, but that's what it is. 5 business days and you pay 0.25% penalty. So the question becomes, when does that cooling off period actually start? Well, here's what I thought, which turned out to be correct. The cooling off period starts from when the contract is dated and the buyer and seller each get a copy, which for me is always within an hour of the contract being dated. So now both the buyer and seller have a copy. 5 business days later at 5 p.m, that's the end of their cooling off period. So if I sell the property on Saturday or Sunday, 5 business days is Monday through Friday, 5 o'clock on Friday, end of the cooling off period. If the buyer backs out now and they don't have any other reason to back out, meaning there's no building pest or finance, which in this case there wasn't, clean contract, the only thing in it was the cooling off period. So here's what happened. So on the Monday following, so now we're on the 6th business day past the contract date, the buyer's solicitor sent an email saying buyers changed their mind, they're backing out on the cooling off period, we'll pay 0.25%, that's the end of the deal. I jumped on the phone immediately and said, whoa, no, you are 100% wrong. The cooling off period ended on Friday, 5 business days after the contract was fully accepted and every party got a copy. Solicitor for the buyer said, no, you are 100% wrong as the agent. Cooling off period doesn't start until the solicitors get the contract. I said, no, you're wrong. Give me a few minutes. I'll send you the actual legislation and then you can apologize to me. So I went online, found the legislation, found it in the Act, sent it to the solicitor. He was 100% wrong. It has nothing to do with when the solicitors get the contract. That's irrelevant in Queensland. It's when the buyer and seller get a signed and dated copy. That's the start of the cooling off period. Now, unfortunately, the seller solicitor was also confused on this. They also thought it was from the date they get the contract, not from the date when the buyer actually gets the contract and everything's accepted. So if I hadn't caught this, the seller would have thrown away $40,000 of the buyer's deposit, which he was entitled to keep. The buyer would have been upset because they thought they were within their cooling off period and they actually weren't, because the buyer's solicitor screwed up. The seller's solicitor screwed up because they thought the buyer was entitled to get that money back because they were within their cooling off period. So it's really scary to think both these experienced solicitors, both big companies, I won't name them, but both of them were in error. And what's surprising is neither one of those solicitors, after they realised they'd made a $40,000 mistake, neither of them called or emailed and said, gosh, Daryl, you know what? You were right and I was wrong. Maybe that's not surprising, but as a buyer and as a seller, be aware, be very clear on what the cooling off period is, especially when we get what we call unconditional contracts, where the only thing in it is a cooling off period. Make sure you know when that actually starts from and when it actually ends, and that way you won't throw away money as a buyer or as a seller. That's it. Pretty wound up on this one, but it just got under my skin that solicitors can be that wrong and then not apologize. Surprise, surprise. That's it. Want to buy a house? Call me. I'll help you. Want to sell the house? Call me. I'll show you what we do completely differently from the average agent. And if you want to get your house managed, we're a professional team. We'll also show what we do differently from any other company in the area. That's it for now. See you all next week.